Jeśli kojarzycie film Snajper, na pewno kojarzycie również nazwisko jego reżysera, Clint Eastwood. Na pewno kojarzycie również odtwórcę głównej roli, czyli Bradley'a Coopera. Możecie nie kojarzyć nazwiska naszego dzisiejszego gościa, Kevin Lace, autor książki Mściciel, ostatni snajper. Pojawia się w tym filmie również i to w dwóch rolach. Jest doradcą na planie i występuje również w kilku epizodach. Książka Kevina sprzedała się u nas w bardzo dużej ilości egzemplarzy, cieszy się dużym powodzeniem, tak dużym, że została niedawno wznowiona. I właśnie z tej okazji porozmawiamy dzisiaj z Kevinem, zadamy mu kilka pytań nie tylko o amerykańskiego snajpera, nie tylko o film, nie tylko o Hollywood, ale przede wszystkim o jego książkę i jego doświadczenia z wojny w Iraku. Kevin, it's a pleasure to meet you. It's a pleasure to have you here. Although it's a virtual visit, it's not your first visit in Poland, isn't it?
It's not. It is an honor to be here today, and thank you for making the time to discuss The Last Punisher. No, it's not my first time speaking and meeting with Poland, and I was here a few years ago speaking with Dr. LeMay, my partner in the medical clinic, to Sprzeszymy z Grom. I hope I got that right. And it was a conference about traumatic brain injuries and PTSD and kind of how we here in the States treat PTSD and traumatic brain injuries. So that was my first introduction to Poland. And I've always wanted to go. So I got the full tour. I got to speak. I had a fantastic time. And it actually turned into this book opportunity. So I think it was a worthwhile trip. And I look forward to the next time coming to Poland.
Yeah, we hope that you will make it. You'll make time to come here. And we are especially glad because with the second edition of your book here in Poland, I see that you've decided to write a few words to our Polish readers. Did you write it yourself? Do you speak Polish that
actually,
well?
I think we may need to do a giveaway because I have the original right here. I had a lot of help from the publisher in writing that, but it did come from the heart. It was a true statement. Yeah, I did my heritage, and my family's from Poland originally a couple generations ago. So having the book published in Polish was a true honor, and it means a lot to me, my family, and you know, the American forces, especially the SEAL teams, have worked quite frequently hand in hand with the GROM, and it's a true honor to have shared experiences like GROM as a SEAL, and I'm very honored to share that story with the readers because I think there's a lot of commonalities in how we view, you know, terrorism, how we view warfare, and the violence of action that Navy SEALs, you know, take on the battlefield is very, very similar to GROM, and I'm very honored for that story to be published in Polish.
I hear that the book is very popular, so we're glad too that you made time and visited Poland, and we hope it's not that wasn't the last visit. And as we have you here today, I would like to ask you some questions from your readers, because we asked them on the fan page of Polish Special Forces what questions would they like to ask you, and I'll try to bring up a few, and would that be okay with you to answer questions from the readers?
Absolutely.
Okay, so the first question is, in what sense being a SEAL shaped your personality? Did you become a different man because of it? Because of the service? What do you think?
That's a great question. I think I talked about it in the book. I know I talked about it in the book, that SEALs aren't made, they're born. And I truly believe that. I feel that the qualities that it takes to be a SEAL, to be GROM, to be Special Forces, are qualities that, you know, those human beings have at birth. And my path to get to SEAL training was pretty circuitous. It took me a while to get there. You know, it took some hard lessons going to college, not doing well, finding a moment in my life, which was the terrorist attacks of September 11th, 2001, that made me shift focus and point my direction towards the Navy, towards the SEAL teams. However, when I got to basic underwater demolition SEAL training. When I was in that environment, I felt that those qualities I always had, it was perseverance, fortitude, mental toughness, physical toughness, came to the forefront. And I felt that in that environment, I was surrounded by individuals who had those same qualities. So I feel that it definitely shaped me into who I am today, but I also believe that those qualities were there from the get-go. I just needed to be put in an environment where those qualities could come to the forefront, that could be what I put forward, because prior to that, in certain ways, I was not doing that. So following my time in the SEAL teams and my experiences in combat, I feel that it's definitely shaped me as a man and how I approach life and how I approach things. I feel that I'm more aggressive, more to the point. I feel that I appreciate moment to moment. And, you've read that I've lost a few friends in combat. So I definitely appreciate those day-to-day and those friendships and those experiences. But I felt like I've always had those qualities. I felt that the SEAL team perfected those qualities, and I believe truly that's the type of person I am today based on those experiences.
Mm-hmm. One of the anecdotes from the book that stuck with me very, very much was the one when you quote words of a Marine captain, and he was interviewed by CNN, and a reporter asks him what he felt after he shot a terrorist, and the answer was recoil. And let me quote you now, and you wrote, "A thin smile tugged at my lips. My MK11 was suppressed. I would barely even felt that much." I mean, for a civilian like me, it's harsh to hear those words. I mean, do you think that you became less emotional, that you had to shut away this part of yourself, this emotional part, to become a SEAL?
That's a great question. I've received that before, and I felt that writing the book was important because I wanted to get that across and talk about how certain types of individuals, whether it's SEALs, GROM, Green Berets, Rangers, are able to go be very normal family men, be parents, be coaches of soccer, football teams, and then are able to go downrange and do that type of work. I think it's important, and I think I tried to illustrate that in the book, was how nefarious, how devious, how savage the enemy is. And I gave examples of things that they would do to civilians. And I felt that was, necessary to do that for the reader to understand the type of response that has to come from an individual. So when it comes to engaging, terrorist targets, there needs to be that compartmentalization. You have to delineate in your mind that this is a bad person and here's X, Y, and Z. Sure, you're given the rules of engagement and how you can deal with the terrorists and your actions that support that. But mentally, and you have to be comfortable with that this is a bad person and this is a type of response that should be received. And I don't think I don't think there's any cavalier attitude towards engaging terrorists and doing that type of work. I think it's a very business oriented job, obviously. But I think what necessitates that is understanding how truly evil these people are. And they're not your everyday people. They're not people you want living in your neighborhood in Warsaw or in Boston. And that's why we go to meet those people on their turf, in their towns, in their areas, and we meet them first. And that example you brought up is an example of that.
Mm-hmm. Second question from your readers. What was the most dangerous situation you found yourself during the mission? And do you think you would be able to get out of it had it not been for your SEALs training? In other words, were there any very, very dangerous situations, any difficult situations which you think you wouldn't be able to cope with if you weren't a SEAL?
Yes. Being in combat is inherently dangerous. The first week that I was in Iraq, there was a young man who was in the Army. He was getting ready to ship back home and go back to the States. And he was, just at the restroom, and a mortar came in and took his life. So, being in combat is inherently dangerous. It doesn't matter if you're leaving the wire or the perimeter of your base or your forward operating base, or you're just waiting in line at chow. My wife has a friend that she grew up with on Christmas, right after Christmas, was killed in a suicide attack inside the chow hall. So being overseas and being in these areas are inherently dangerous. I feel that the one incident that probably was the most dangerous was the day that we lost Mark Lee and Ryan Jobe. And that was the kind of the culmination of 6 months of pretty intense combat. And we had started doing a lot of daytime operations. And Ryan was struck in the face by a sniper round early in the morning. And on a subsequent follow-on mission, Mark Lee was shot as we entered the building and started moving through the house. But in those moments, you don't think about the danger. And I think there's a lot of people that can attest to that. Whether you're a surgeon who's operating, and you're operating on a young child who has cancer, the stakes are very, very high and the stress is very, very high. But in the moment, you focus on your task at hand. And I believe that, as a SEAL, the training that we went through, the repetitions that we went through, made it necessary to prepare us for those moments where the stress is very high, the danger is high, the fear is high. But the one thing that's common among every individual in that SEAL platoon is the training. And I can attest and say that, there is a lot of fear, there is a lot of, anxiety, but when you focus on the work that you've done time and time again, that dissipates. You don't even think about it. So I feel that each individual is very strong in moments like that. On August 2nd, 2006, that was when Mark was shot and Ryan was shot, that the training was what we relied on, and the training was what we went back to, and the training was the reason why we were able to escape that situation without further damage and loss of life.
Mm-hmm. And did you felt prepared as a military member, as a soldier, as a SEAL, when you first came to Iraq? Before you didn't, your first time in a fight, what was in your head? You felt like, okay, I can do this, I'm very, very well prepared, or you were a little bit uncertain if I can cope with that, if that would be something I can do? I know that the training is very, very, very hard, and you do a lot of repetitions, and you put yourself in different situations. However, in being in a combat, I can imagine it's totally different world. How did you feel then?
Yeah, Caroline, great question. There's a movie that came out a long time ago called Fight Club, and there's a line in Fight, and it's the other actor. Anyways, but the line in Fight Club is how much do you know about yourself until you've been in a fight? And it's very apropos with the SEAL teams in training. You train constantly. And the training is very, very realistic. And, you prepare to a point, but you never know how someone's going to react when, you get shot at, or you're shot, or you're put in these dangerous situations. So I believe the Navy does a fantastic job of preparing SEALs for combat and making training as realistic as possible. But at the end of the day, when you go to Iraq, when you go to Afghanistan, when you go to a combat zone, you don't know until you actually engage. And I was fortunate, to look around me to my left and my right and see that the comfortability level was very high because of the type of individuals I was surrounded with. And that goes back to the training that we had, and how arduous and how strenuous and how selective it is. It weeds out individuals who possibly, can falter in combat, under fire, under stress. So, getting to Iraq, I was comfortable, but there's still that uneasiness that I'm not going to know until I get shot at. And then when that occurred, I felt I was very prepared.
Mm-hmm. And what do you think is the biggest misconception people have about Navy SEALs? Because there are many rumors, many things that probably when you hear, you laugh instantly. And what's the greatest gossip you heard about Navy SEALs, and it's totally untrue?
Yeah, I've gotten a few, and they always say, "Well, did they drown you?" I was like, "Well, no. Drown means you died, and I didn't die. But they definitely get you to the point where you're very low on oxygen, and there's certain evolutions like drown proofing where they take you to the combat training tank and they tie your hands behind your back, your feet behind your feet together, and they push you in the pool in the 9-foot section. at a 3-meter section, and they have you bounce up and down off the pool deck, and then they have you swim 100 meters with your hands and feet tied without touching the walls, and then you have to come back and float for 10 minutes, and then you have to go back and bob up and down for another 10 minutes and pick a mask up off the deck with your teeth and continue to bob up and down. So there's evolutions like that where people definitely freak out. So they assume that they drown you and bring you back to life. That did not occur. I also had somebody ask me, do you have to raise a German Shepherd during training and then have to kill it to the end to prove that you can actually kill people? I was like, no, that's not true. I love dogs, and I don't think I'd be able to do that. But I've heard some pretty ludicrous, claims out there, but they make me laugh. And sometimes, you kind of have to you have to perpetuate the myth a little bit and indulge them just a little bit. But I've heard some silly things.
Mm-hmm. Next questions from your readers. What emotions were the hardest to cope with during your service? And what was the toughest choice you had to make?
Curveball answer. Getting out of the Navy was the hardest thing to do. Getting out of the Navy was tough because I'd worked very, very hard to be a SEAL. And when I decided, it was time to get out of the Navy, go back to school, go back to college, university, and get my degree and go into medicine, that was a tough choice. I was leaving behind something I'd worked very, very hard for, and then chose an alternate career path. So that was tough. There are times where there weren't a lot of tough decisions in the Navy. It was exactly what I wanted to do. Sure, there were times where I was let down, where, I can't even give you an example. I wanted to go to a certain school and it wasn't available to train. A certain training school wasn't available. I think that was probably the biggest letdown. But it was something I'd worked very hard to get to. So every day was a great day, and I didn't feel like the disappointments were that high. But getting out of the Navy was probably the toughest decision I had to make.
Mm-hmm. And what about emotions? I mean, the first part of the question is about emotions, and I presume that the person who wrote it maybe thought about the emotions that you had to cope with during the service in Iraq, during the tour. What emotions are in the head of a Navy SEAL who is there in the middle, and your family is very, very far away. You're with your mates, but you are in an extremely dangerous place. What runs through your head on a daily basis? I mean, I imagine you do not live in a constant fear, but this this strain must take its toll, and you must be very, very, tired of this nervous emotions, bad emotions. I don't know. Is it easy to cope with?
Good question. Yeah. So, if your deployment is 6-7 months long, if you're constantly on edge, you're going to get burnt out pretty quick. So I feel you have to treat it like a dimmer switch, a light switch. So you turn the light on, it gets brighter, and then you turn it back down. And that's kind of how we approach the emotional component of doing the job. There's a lot of off time. You can't work 24 hours a day, so we have time off. There's time to mission plan. There's time to sight in your guns, make sure they're good to go. And then as that operation starts to form and as the time to launch begins, those you become more heightened. You check your gear, you make sure you're prepared, and then when you're on target, it's simply business. There are higher emotions, obviously, when platoon mates have been shot or injured. So controlling those emotions, it has to come from within. If you run around with your head on fire, like your butt's catching, you're going to look like pretty silly. And what you do is you destabilize that platoon, that fighting group, and you make that weaker. So you have to keep those emotions in check. And I can definitely attest that on target, when you're doing the job, each individual is pretty darn calm. And it's actually kind of funny. You'll head to a target building, you'll be driving or flying, and you look to your right and you'll see your buddy sleeping on the way in. So that kind of sums up how a lot of people deal with that stress. They kind of just turn that dimmer switch down a little bit and get some relaxation time.
Mm-hmm. when talking about emotions, the topic that comes to one's head must be PTSD, because that's I guess it's a huge issue among veterans. Do you think, first of all, is it a huge issue from your point of view, and do you think that the army has a way of dealing with that nowadays? And the second thing is that whether you think maybe during the training, maybe during the SEAL training, they should teach you how to cope with those emotions, as you say, that are locked in your head, and you do not allow them to go out. Maybe that's the time when you also should think about it.
Yeah, I think PTSD has been present throughout millennia. Anytime there's been trauma, I think people have a stress response to it. I feel that, we've called PTSD battle fatigue, shell shock. It's been in combat, it's been, documented for a very, very long time. I believe that anybody who's seen some sort of trauma, you could be driving down the highway and see a very horrific accident and you can have PTSD. I feel that it's gotten a lot of focus more recently for many different reasons. Do I think it's real? Absolutely. Do I think it's as prevalent as it's documented? I don't. I think probably about 20% of veterans who have seen combat have PTSD. I think, if you look at, first responders, medical services, policemen, there's PTSD there. PTSD in sexual assault victims. So PTSD is very pervasive wherever you go. Do I feel that the military is doing a good job of addressing that? I do. And I think men are stubborn, and primarily, it tends to be seen more in men, because when we focus on combat, it tends to be more so in men. So I feel that men are more stubborn, so they're not going to ask for the therapy or the treatment because they don't want to talk about their emotions. But I feel the U.S. military and veteran services have done a good job of that, and that's when we talked at the conference 2 years ago. That's one of the things we talked about was traumatic brain injuries and PTSD, and it is something that's seen. I don't think that every veteran has it, but I think you need to find those early warning signs and do the proper debriefing and decompression from combat, because it can have some negative side effects, and it could change that person's trajectory in life and their potential and what they can do. So there are treatments available. I feel that the U.S. is doing a better job of that. I think Poland's doing a good job of that from what I've seen, and it's something that we're going to continually work on, because pie in the sky, we want there to be no warfare ever again, but there will be, and we just have to be prepared for that and be able to take care of our veterans when they do come home from those operations.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, sure. Okay. Now we have the last question from the readers, which you partially answered, but I'll ask it anyway because it leads us to one very interesting topic as well. So the question is, do you miss the army? And is it true that when you end a tour, you instantly want to come back, as it was presented in American Sniper?
Do I miss the Navy? Yeah, I missed the Navy. I really did when I got out of the Navy, because I was in a great team. I had a lot of friends there, and then I left Southern California where I was stationed. I went to Connecticut, which for your listeners and viewers, it's not too far from New York. So I was in the middle of nowhere. There aren't a lot of SEALs, and I went back to college, and I was 28 at the time, and I was going back to college with 18-year-old students. So it made me. I had some buyer's remorse and really questioned myself if that was the right decision to make. And then a few months after I got out, a friend of mine named Rob O'Neill shot Osama bin Laden, and SEALs kind of exploded on the public scene on who's who, and yeah, at that point I really I was like, I don't think I made the right choice. So I definitely missed SEAL teams, and I missed my time in the SEAL teams, because it really developed me into who I am today. And that was a great time in my life, and it was something I look back fondly on. But I think that at certain periods of time, I was like, man, I think I made the wrong choice. However, as I finished school and started on my course, I realized that I did make the right choice, and I'm happy where I ended up today, and what I've been able to do since leaving the Navy.
Mm-hmm. And is it true that that when you end the tour, most soldiers, they want to come back, they want to do another tour and another. Is it common among you?
Yeah, absolutely. Especially, you know, when I was in the mid 2000s, early 2000s, warfare changed, and I think that anybody that goes into special operations, and that's one of the things we wanted to identify with The Last Punisher, was that, you know, you join the SEAL teams for a reason. It's not to you know, just wear a nice gold trident on your chest. It's not to be, you know, a fast runner or a fast swimmer. It's to go to combat, and that's the reason why you do the job. It's not to just tell people you're a SEAL. It's to actually be able to do SEAL stuff. So you know, going there, doing that job, and being in the Navy at that time was a very unique time. You know, with Afghanistan kicking off, Iraq kicking off, there was a lot of work to be done, and you know, there was a new time in how they were using SEALs, in what context they were using SEALs, working with conventional forces, and also prior to that, SEALs hadn't been used for a while. You know, there wasn't a lot of conflict since, you know, the mid 90s with Bosnia and Kosovo. So, you know, we'd kind of been in the wings waiting to do a job. So when we were given work to do, there was plenty of work to do, and there was plenty of terrorists to address. So those deployments that we did, there were, you know, that there was that theme that I want to go back, I want to do this, I want to do this again, because it's kind of like a drug. You know, combat's kind of like a drug, and it once you're hooked, you're hooked. And I've seen a lot of individuals that go back to back. Then there's your contract. How long do you have in the Navy? And then, you know, you can do back to back deployments, but you do have to re-enlist. So the movie portrays it one way, and Chris, you know, definitely kept going back and back. But in real life, you know, they'll take you back after a couple deployments, and you go to training, because you have all this experience that it's important that you train, you know, new SEALs that are going through the pipeline, and you know, new SEALs that are training up for war. You want those realistic, you know, those very time sensitive, you know, lessons learned applied to the instructor staff and to the new trainees, so they're prepared to go to war. But to answer that question, yes, there is that surge of energy that I want to go back to back deployments, because at that point in time, the getting was good, and it was a fun time to be a SEAL.
Mm-hmm. Having mentioned American Sniper, I could not ask. I must ask this question because you were, apart from that, you were one of the actors in the film. You also were. You also advised the people who made the film on how to prepare, on how to shoot, on how the reality up there looked. And I wonder if there are any moments during the film when you watch it now and you think, damn, I told them to do it this way and they did it differently. And I don't know, Bradley Cooper, I told him that, you know, you should hold the gun this way and he does another way. Are there any moments like this?
Yeah, that's a great. I think you may have heard one of my interviews before. Yeah, so American Sniper was really, really fun to film, and you realize that you're a small fish in a very big pond, and there's so many layers to the filming process, to the production standpoint, to actually getting to the point, and then the final edit. So we spent probably about 3.5 months working on American Sniper, actually filming. Prior to that, it was about a year and a few months to develop the screenplay. And during that time frame, Bradley's training, and I can honestly say that you know, Bradley did a fantastic job in preparation. He didn't have Chris, you know, living, breathing Chris Kyle to operate off of. And a lot of what he got from Chris Kyle was interviews from friends and family and what he saw on TV. So Bradley did a fantastic job, and he's very talented in what genres he can play, and he did a great job as Chris. Working with Clint Eastwood was incredible. Clint has I'm sure a lot of your viewers have seen a lot of Clint's movies, and he has a very special way of portraying and telling a story. So I think he did a great job. You know, Jason, who wrote this screenplay, did a good job. He had only met Chris once or twice, and so a lot of the facts and a lot of the anecdotal stories he got from friends and family. So you put all that together, you have a big-time director like Clint Eastwood, you have a big-time actor like Bradley Cooper, you know, Sienna Miller, and then the whole cast was fantastic. And we're telling a story, so there's a lot of takes here and there, and ones that you think are perfect, you know, the editor will take the other take on that session. But you know, I think overall they did a good job. I think they overall captured, you know, what it's like to be a SEAL, the stress of it. You know, there's little nuances that are lost in the filming process. It's a movie. I like to remind people it's a movie. So the, you know, back-to-back deployments, you know, aren't always the case. It doesn't seem like you're home for 2 weeks and then you go back to combat. There's some time off to train and get set back up again. When it comes to, you know, Bradley carrying a gun or doing that sort of thing, I think he did a good job with what we had. And there's always budgets, there's time, there's, you know, resources that are limitations on what you can actually film, what you can't film. But I always felt that they were receptive, especially Clint, when there was a, hey, this moment, this would be better. Clint was always very receptive, as was Bradley. And I think that's not always the case in some of these biopic movies where there's a subject who's no longer with you. The director or the lead actor will go do their own thing. But I felt that they were always good. You know, there was a couple things here and there. I was like, I don't know if I'd do that. But overall, it was a great movie, and I'm very proud of it. And I hope you guys enjoyed it. Mm-hmm.
Yes, of course. It was, well, if we can say it was fun to watch, but not, you know, not.
I can agree with that. I think it's fun to watch, and you know, I think you know, it's entertaining. It's fun to watch. It's tough. I think that, you know what, you reminded me. I think that there's a heavy emphasis on PTSD in American Sniper, and I think that, you know, for your viewers, you know, your readers out there, that and you'll read in The Last Punisher that Chris was a funny guy. Chris was a very, very funny guy. There was a lot of comedy with him. He would like to make people laugh. He was always in a good mood. And I felt that with American Sniper, that there was a darker side to it. And that kind of got lost because that's not how Chris was all the time. And I think, you know, the takeaway was, hey, here's this emphasis on Chris, you know, PTSD, and then he's murdered. So that's probably one thing that when I look back at American Sniper, I wish that they had focused more on the comedy of Chris and, you know, how funny he was and how much of a fun teammate he was to be around. Mm-hmm.
And what about the book? Books, maybe? Do you plan on writing something new? Because in Poland, as I said, it's a second edition of your book, of your quite popular books. So maybe some other parts would be necessary?
Yeah, so my wife and I, Lindsay, we actually wrote another book called the Veterans Workbook, and it's actually coming out soon. It's basically a how-to guide for returning soldiers, sailors, airmen, Marines, on how to transition out of the military and going back to school, finding a job, and, you know, kind of those mental checklists that you need to go through to be successful. And I feel like the military does a good job of preparing you. They give you a baseline when it comes to getting out of the military, but I felt like we needed to increase awareness and increase the longevity of that transition, and we did that through the Veterans Workbook. So that should be coming out this summer.
Thank you very much, Kevin, for the interview.
Ilana, thank you so much. I appreciate your time, and I look forward to more success with the book, and I hope your readers really enjoy it. We put a lot of time into it, and Ilona, I appreciate the effort that they've done to bring it to the readers, and I look forward to visiting hopefully soon. And once this COVID thing goes away, I look forward to coming and spend some time in Poland.
We'll be happy to have you here. Thank you very much.
Thank you.